Have you ever heard of a killer so ruthless that he single-handedly changed the way an entire city lived in fear? This is the horrifying case of Danny Rolling, a man whose brutal killing spree in Gainesville, Florida in 1990 left 5 college students mutilated, staged like horror movie victims, and sparked terror across the University of Florida campus. His crimes were so disturbing that they would later inspire one of the most iconic horror films of all time, Scream. But what drove Rolling to commit these unspeakable acts? And how did investigators finally track down the monster lurking in the shadows? Stick around as we uncover the terrifying truth behind the Gainesville Ripper. Danny Rolling's childhood was marked by severe abuse, instability, and early signs of violent tendencies. Born in 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, he grew up under the rule of a brutally abusive father, James Rolling, a decorated police officer who was both physically and emotionally cruel. From the moment Danny was born, his father made it clear that he was unwanted. He beat Danny regularly, calling him worthless, stupid, and a failure, punishing him for even minor infractions. His mother, Claudia, attempted to leave multiple times, but always returned, unable to escape the cycle of domestic abuse. The trauma escalated when James Rolling killed the family dog in front of Danny, an act meant to teach him a twisted lesson about obedience. It left a lasting impression on him, reinforcing the violent and sadistic mindset that would later fuel his crimes. Rolling struggled with anger, social alienation, and a growing darkness inside him. He later claimed that he had multiple personalities, one of which, he said, was named Gemini, the entity he blamed for his most violent urges. As a teenager, Rolling began acting out in disturbing ways. He was arrested multiple times for burglary, voyeurism, and violent outbursts, but no one imagined that these petty crimes were just the beginning of something much darker. He struggled to hold down jobs, attempted to enlist in the Air Force, but was rejected due to drug use, and eventually drifted from town to town, unable to fit into normal society. By his early 20s, he was developing violent fantasies, and by his 30s, those fantasies had turned into something real: murder. In 1989, a year before the Gainesville murders, Rolling committed his first known triple homicide. He broke into the home of the Grissom family in Shreveport, where he murdered 55-year-old William Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. Not only were they brutally killed, but their bodies were ritually staged, posed in an eerie, theatrical fashion that suggested Rolling wasn't just a killer, but a sadist who wanted control, even after death. The murder of the Grissoms bore striking similarities to what he would later do in Florida. But at the time, police had no idea that they were dealing with a future serial killer honing his craft. If this case is as chilling to you as it sounds, take a second to like this video. It really helps the channel out. By August of 1990, Rowling had made his way to Florida, where he would embark on one of the most terrifying murder sprees in American history. His first known Gainesville victims were 17-year-old Christina Powell and 18-year-old Sonia Larson, both freshmen at the University of Florida. Rowling broke into their apartment in the middle of the night, silently climbed the stairs, and found Sonia sleeping in her bed. Without hesitation, he covered her mouth with duct tape, stabbed her to death, and left her body posed in a disturbing manner. Then he moved on to Christina, who had been sleeping on the couch. Rowling bound her wrists, sexually assaulted her, and then stabbed her repeatedly. But it wasn't just murder. Rowling mutilated the victims' bodies, cut off nipples, and posed them in grotesque, theatrical positions before leaving. The next day, Gainesville police officers walked into a nightmare. 2 young women butchered in their own home, left in a scene straight out of a horror movie. Rowling wasn't done. The next night, he struck again, targeting 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, a Santa Fe College student. He broke into her apartment, waited for her to return, and ambushed her. After stabbing her multiple times, he beheaded her and posed her body with her severed head placed on a shelf, staring at the crime scene. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through Gainesville, and by the next morning, the entire town was in a full-blown panic. The University of Florida went into lockdown mode. Students barricaded their doors, slept in groups, and refused to go out alone at night. With 3 murders in just 2 nights, police frantically searched for the killer. But Rowling wasn't done. 2 days later, he targeted 23-year-old Tracy Pauls and 23-year-old Manuel Manny-Taboada, 2 roommates who lived near the university. Unlike his previous victims, Manny was a strong, athletic man, and he fought back hard against Rowling. But Rowling, armed with a hunting knife, eventually overpowered him, stabbing him over 30 times. Tracy, who had locked herself in a bedroom, was Rowling's final victim. He broke down the door, assaulted her, and stabbed her to death, once again posing her body in a gruesome display. By this point, Gainesville was in a state of absolute terror. Hundreds of students fled the city. Police launched the largest manhunt in Florida's history, and false suspects were being arrested left and right. But while police were scrambling, Rowling had already left town. The break in the case came from an unlikely source: an armed robbery in Ocala, Florida. Just days after the Gainesville murders, Rowling was arrested for robbing a supermarket, but because his DNA didn't immediately connect him to the murders, he sat in jail unnoticed. It wasn't until investigators connected his campsite, found outside Gainesville, to evidence from the crime scenes that they realized they had their killer. Once in custody, Rowling confessed to the murders, but blamed his actions on an alternate personality he called Gemini, a demon he claimed controlled his urges. Psychologists diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, but the jury wasn't buying it. In 1994, Rowling was convicted and sentenced to death. On October 25th, 2006, after 16 years on death row, Danny Rowling was executed by lethal injection. His final words? He sang a gospel hymn, showing no remorse for the terror he inflicted. Rolling's savage, theatrical murders changed Gainesville forever. He wasn't just a killer, he was a predator who thrived on control, ritual, and fear. His methods of stalking, ambushing, and mutilating his victims became the inspiration for the 1996 horror film Scream, cementing his place as one of America's most disturbing serial killers. What do you think? Was Danny Rolling purely evil, or was there something even darker at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.